Well, good morning. This is Ian R. Crane. I am here. Was just taking a short walk across the field there. Anyway, it's the morning of Monday, 30th of April, the last day of the month. And next month is certainly going to be very interesting because we have elections coming up this coming Thursday in many local authorities, particularly up in the northwest of England, particularly around Lancashire. Also in Sheffield and a few places dotted down the rest of the country. But this is a real opportunity, of course, for people to give the Tories a massive spanking. I know there are a number of people watching this who don't believe in voting, but just let me make the observation that the establishment doesn't want you to vote. It really doesn't care why you don't vote as long as you don't vote, because the establishment knows very, very well that those people who will generally elect not to vote certainly wouldn't be voting for an establishment representative. So they'd much rather you stay at home. So, of course, that's absolutely your choice. But for those people who are prepared to make an effort to vote, then use that vote wisely. And particularly in Sheffield, which has its first mayoral elections. So this is another move, of course, for the creation of city-states around not just the UK but around the world. And there are a number of candidates here, some of whom might actually be sympathetic to the idea that Sheffield Council should be somewhat more transparent about its dealings with Amy and the £2.2 billion contract to destroy 17,500 trees. Fortunately, that activity is on pause at the moment, and that pause is directly related to the growing awareness that this campaign to destroy the trees in Sheffield is very much linked to 5G. Now, I'm very well aware that there are some activist groups in Sheffield who refuse to acknowledge that there is any link with the 5G rollout, and that's absolutely fine. The important thing is that it doesn't matter why you're objecting to the tree removal in Sheffield, you're objecting to it. Now, those people who are joining the dots and looking at the bigger picture, then obviously you're reaching out to a different audience. But all around the country, people need to be doing their own research and start by looking at the papers that have been produced by the 5G committee that has been set up at the University of Surrey in conjunction with the industry, and look at the documentation that they have produced, which prove beyond any reasonable doubt that 5G is a problem if it is in an environment that there's a lot of trees, particularly trees that have leaves on, which tends to be most unless they're dead. And basically, once those leaves get rainwater on them, then 5G just doesn't work, period. So the technologists don't want this rollout to be a flop, so they're doing whatever it takes to clear, literally, the decks for 5G. So a very, very important date, particularly for the people of Sheffield. Please be sure that you elect a mayor that is going to represent the interests of the people and not of the corporatocracy. Well, and if that happens, then I guess pigs might fly. But hey, got to give it a whirl, right? Well, I'm pretty excited about this week, actually, because, of course, at the end of the week, we start the AV9 conference. And whilst it is completely sold out of residential rooms, in fact, we have a waiting list, there are a number of day tickets still available, and we'll be covering such issues as 5G. Mark Steele from Gateshead will be there. He'll be giving a presentation on the Sunday afternoon, and he'll be hosting a workshop on Monday. We'll have Max Egan, we have Thomas Sheridan, we have Brian Gerrish, Patrick Henningson, and the outstanding investigative journalist Diliana Gatenshiva, who was my guest on last Thursday's episode of Humanity versus Insanity. Also speaking will be Terry Boardman, Many people will be familiar with Terry's outstanding work of the late 20th century, where he effectively predicted very precisely everything that has rolled out over the last 2 decades. And then from the US, we have Jay Dyer talking about esoteric Hollywood, and Benny Wheels from Joy Division, both of whom will be speaking in the UK for the first time. So if you are interested in joining some 250 plus independent thinkers at the largest event of this nature in the UK, then take a look at the Alternative View website. That's www.alternativeview.co.uk. Now, fracking might get a mention, call it a hunch, but the title of today's broadcast is INEOS and the Glorification of Plunder. And this is a reference to a quote from an early 19th century French economist, an author, Frederic Bastiat. And he wrote, "When plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men living together in society, they create for themselves, in the course of time, a legal system that authorises plunder and a moral code that glorifies plunder." And this is precisely what Jim Ratcliffe of INEOS and all of the members of UKOOG, the UK onshore oil and gas PR mouthpiece, who are effectively glorifying plunder, regardless of the impact that it has on really anybody. And in fact, Jim Ratcliffe, of course, as the owner of one of the largest producers of plastic in the world, has bought, quite possibly, one of his most high-profile critics, Ben Ainslie, Sir Ben Ainslie, no less. And Sir Ben Ainslie, the winner of 4 gold medals in the Olympics, has, of course, set up his racing team to challenge for the America's Cup. Now, a little over a year ago, Sir Ben Ainslie tweeted that he had seen masses of islands of plastic in the oceans when he was sailing. But somehow I doubt that he's going to be making those kind of observations anymore, seeing as Jim Ratcliffe has bunged him 110 million to prostitute himself. It was to support the America's Cup bid. And shutting Ben Ainslie up, of course, is just a byproduct. But how absurd is it that one of the most prolific polluters on the planet attempts to glorify their operation by sponsoring the Daily Mile, an effort to get children to actually take more exercise? Well, maybe they could just try walking to school, perhaps, just as we all did. Then, of course, trying to effectively get on the world stage, get into the public mind by sponsoring Ben Ainslie's America's Cup bid. Shutting down any reference to Ben Ainslie himself, Ben Ainslie Racing or Land Rover, the previous sponsors, and taking total control of the project. Well, call it a hunch, but I would say this is likely to end in tears, because Jim Ratcliffe is going to want his money's worth, and he's certainly going to look to have a significant input, shall we say. Now, Frederic Bastiat was perhaps also one of the first to realise the folly of what Naomi Klein has subsequently termed disaster capitalism. And Frederic Bastiat was the author of the parable of the broken window, and I won't bore you with that today, but if you're looking at, we've got a few minutes to spare and you're online, go check out the parable of the broken window. So, what else is going on? Well, of course, Jim Ratcliffe is looking to sue the Scottish Government. And in an interesting turn of events, it seems that Friends of the Earth in Scotland have managed to succeed in getting access to the courts in what is known in Scotland as an intervention. And this is an opportunity for Friends of the Earth to effectively present a case to the Scottish courts to try to convince the Scottish courts that Jim Ratcliffe and INEOS's attempt to sue the Scottish government for banning fracking is effectively unlawful. But, nonetheless, of course, no doubt Jim Ratcliffe will have been making the rounds at the weekend and, put a few brown envelopes around. So it's going to be very interesting to see what transpires later this week. But, don't hold your breath, because, we are now in a situation in, almost the first fifth of the 21st century is over. And yet, we are taking a serious downward turn in terms of humanity. It is now becoming the domain of the corporate globalist, or the global corporatist, the socio-psychopaths who work on the basis that the only purpose for being on this earth is to plunder it and plunder everyone of everything that they thought they owned. And if they disagree with you, then just go after them in the courts and or threaten to remove everything that they've worked hard for, so that you can increase your already obscene wealth. I mean, in some ways, I must confess, I really feel sorry for the likes of Jim Ratcliffe. I mean, what kind of mentality is that? It is so self-centered. And, we saw that just a few years ago when INEOS took on the trade unions at Grangemouth and effectively destroyed the trade unions by playing on the short-term fears of the employees. So whereas the unions probably, I think, did have a good case against what Ratcliffe was trying to do, he effectively bought off about a third of the workforce by offering them £15,000 upfront in return for them agreeing to pay freezes, to not striking for the next 3 years, and to end the final salary pension scheme that was in place. So Jim Ratcliffe's not interested in sharing his wealth with his employees. His employees, in fact, he treats them no better, in fact, a lot worse in some respects, than plantation owners in the Deep South in the days of slavery. This is modern day slavery, where basically you keep the employees on such a tight rein that they are scared of losing the roof over their head or not being able to feed their family. And this is what these guys get off on. It's how much can they make while screwing everybody around them. It's a mentality that I must confess I struggle to have any empathy with whatsoever. So let's hope the Friends of the Earth are successful in their bid to counter Jim Ratcliffe's attempt to sue the Scottish government. And of course, I hope that what Friends of the Earth are also going to do is raise awareness of the fact that the licensed area that runs to the north and east of Glasgow expires at the end of June. And in fact, the Scottish government, who now have full responsibility for the issuance and the rescinding of these licenses in Scotland, shut it down on the basis that INEOS have not fulfilled the obligation of the license. So the only element that INEOS could possibly have any grievance about is the license over in the east of the country. And of course, INEOS are also up against it in South Yorkshire with the public inquiry as to whether or not they should be able to take their vehicles down the narrow lanes around the Hart Hill area. And the traffic management plan, which they claim will have zero impact on the local community, will of course absolutely destroy that community. And anyone who thinks that INEOS are going to go in and just drill one well, then is living in a world of absolute delusion. You know, you don't go do seismic unless you intend to drill. You don't go drill unless you intend to frack. And you don't frack unless you intend to literally establish a network of wells right across the country, because that is the only way that this industry has any chance of survival. I won't say profit, because you won't make profit, but just literally survival. And down in the south, I have to say that a turn of events last week, when Europa withdrew its objections to Surrey County Council, effectively taking so long over its decision on its upgraded or modified traffic management plan. And this does look as though Europa have finally conceded. There's still obviously some T's to be crossed and I's to be dotted, but the bottom line is, if Europa thought for 1 minute that they were ever going to be able to get the infrastructure up Cold Harbour Lane, then again, they were living in a world of absolute delusion. Because I can pretty much guarantee that as soon as the first HGV starts to go up Cold Harbour Lane, then that will be a clarion call to the anti-fracking community right across the south of England. And the woodland, the ancient woodland that the HGVs would have to go through as they got up to the potential well site there, is perfect guerrilla territory. Maybe the vehicles would get a few hundred yards into the woodland, and then there might be some kind of blockade, and that blockade might be dealt with, and then they might get a few hundred yards further, and then there'd be another blockade. There is not enough police in the south of England to be able to enforce Europa to get their kit onto Leith Hill. So this may well be a smart move by Europa, but let's see what unfolds. Meanwhile, later today in the House of Commons, the Housing, Communities and Local Government Committee will sit to look at whether or not there needs to be changes in the planning legislation in regards to unconventional gas exploitation. And of course, the British government is looking to do everything it possibly can to do the opposite as to what it did with wind farms, where it's effectively shut them down. But it's looking to remove any possible opposition to unconventional gas exploitation in the UK. Anyway, this committee will be sitting today under the chairmanship of Clive Betts. But let's take a look at who's going to be presenting to this committee today. Well, first of all, the ubiquitous Ken Cronin, who will no doubt be trotting out his tired old dialogue as to how desperate the country is for its own supply of onshore gas. Well, bottom line, Ken, no one really believes you, but no doubt you're going to get a sympathetic hearing. Matt Lambert, the Director of Government Affairs with Quadrilla, and then the extremely high maintenance Lynn Calder, the Commercial Director of INEOS, and so they're presenting on behalf of the industry. So we pretty much know all the crap that they're going to come out with to the committee. And then on the other side of the table will be Chris Hesketh, who's the chairman of Frack Free Duddleston. And of course, Chris was instrumental in running iGas, formerly Dart Energy, out of Shropshire a few years ago. And then Keir Traynor, who's the Campaign for Protection of Rural England Director in Sussex, and Kate Gordon, who's a senior planner with Friends of the Earth. So that is actually going to be live streamed at 4 p.m. this afternoon. So if the paint that you're watching has finished drying, then maybe take a look at what's going on in this planning committee. And of course, the planning committee consists of one very important player there, Kevin Hollinsnake, the MP for Thirsk and Morton up in North Yorkshire, who of course has been the mouthpiece for the unconventional gas industry ever since he got himself elected, because his local party forced his predecessor Anne McIntosh out of the role. And he's been constantly banging on about how amazing this industry will be for North Yorkshire. But I think he's beginning to realise that the level and the magnitude of opposition is such that if he persists down this line, then, you know, yeah, he'll get elected, because you could put a stuffed monkey, oh, they did, up in North Yorkshire, and they get elected. But nonetheless, everywhere that Kevin Hollingrate goes around North Yorkshire, and especially as INEOS and Quadrilla start to manifest in the county, then his 60% majority might suddenly look to be at risk in 2022. So that's about it for today. So I'll be back tomorrow. And don't forget that if you are interested in joining this eclectic group of people, we have people coming in from the US, from Australia, from mainland Europe. It's going to be a truly outstanding weekend, and where any subject can be discussed and is likely to be discussed without fear of being labelled just a conspiracy theory. So thanks again for joining me, and I will catch you tomorrow at 8:30. Take care.